It was a cold morning when she first walked into her new school. Her shoes were worn out and the straps of her backpack were starting to tear, but she didn't seem to care. She was too busy looking around the wide hallways filled with voices, laughter, and the sound of lockers slamming shut. Everything felt bigger here, brighter and noisier than the small school she used to attend. But deep down she knew one thing hadn't changed: her love for music. From the time she was little, she had always been drawn to sound. While other kids played outside, she spent hours tapping her fingers on the kitchen table, pretending it was a piano. Her parents couldn't afford one, but one day her father found a small used keyboard at a flea market. It was scratched, some keys didn't work, and the sound was a little off, but for her it was the most beautiful thing she had ever owned. She taught herself to play by listening to old songs on the radio, pressing the keys until the tune matched. It took months, but she learned every note by heart. Now in this new school, she hoped there would be a music room. She had heard they had a real piano there, a big shiny one that everyone talked about. When she finally saw it for the first time, her eyes widened. It stood in the corner of the music room, polished and grand, glowing under the light that came through the window. It was the kind of piano she had only seen in magazines. She wanted so badly to touch it, even just once. The music teacher, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, noticed her staring. "Do you play?" she asked with a gentle smile. "A little," the girl said shyly, "but I never had lessons." "That's all right," the teacher replied. "You're welcome to practice during breaks if you'd like." Her heart lifted at those words. She spent every lunch break sitting near that piano. She didn't play at first. She was too nervous. Other students gathered in the room sometimes, laughing and talking loudly, and she didn't want them to make fun of her. So she waited until the room was empty, running her fingers over the keys, feeling their smooth surface. It felt like magic under her hands. Days went by and she began pressing the keys softly, one by one, just to hear their sound. Then slowly she started to play small melodies she remembered from home. The notes were shaky, but she kept going, lost in her own world. It was the only time she felt truly free. One afternoon, as she played quietly, a group of students walked in. They were from her class, the kind of kids everyone noticed. They were confident, loud, and always together. When they saw her sitting at the piano, they exchanged amused looks. "Oh, look who's trying to play now," one of them said, smirking. Another laughed. "I didn't know she even knew what a piano was." Her hands froze above the keys. She wanted to disappear. She could feel her cheeks burning as they laughed. She stood up quickly, muttering, "I was just leaving." But as she turned to go, one of them called out, "Hey, if you're going to play, at least show us something real." They laughed again, and she rushed out of the room, her heart pounding. That night at home, she sat at her little keyboard, replaying the moment in her head. She felt embarrassed and angry at herself for walking away. Her father's old words echoed in her mind. "If you believe in something, don't let anyone make you feel small for it." She wiped away a tear and began to play again. Her fingers moved faster, stronger, as if answering the laughter with every note. The next morning, she almost skipped school. She didn't want to face anyone. But then she remembered something. There was going to be a school event at the end of the week. The teacher had announced that students could volunteer to perform. She had stayed quiet during that announcement, but now, sitting in her room, she couldn't stop thinking about it. What if she played there? What if she showed them that she could do it? The thought scared her. What if they laughed again? What if she made a mistake in front of everyone? Her stomach twisted at the idea. But a small voice inside whispered, "What if you don't fail?" On the day of the event, the school auditorium was packed. The lights were bright and the air buzzed with excitement. Students sat in groups, cheering for their friends who were performing. The stage was decorated with colorful banners, and the big piano stood in the center, shining under the spotlight. When the teacher asked if anyone else wanted to perform, there was a brief silence. Then, to everyone's surprise, the girl raised her hand. A few people turned to look at her. Some whispered, others chuckled softly. She felt her heart race, but she kept her hand up. "You'd like to play?" the teacher asked kindly. She nodded. "All right then," the teacher said with a smile. "Come up." As she walked toward the stage, she could hear giggles from the audience. Someone whispered, "This is going to be funny." Another said, "She's going to mess up for sure." Her palms were sweating. She could barely breathe. When she reached the piano, she stood there for a second, frozen. The keys seemed to blur before her eyes. She wanted to run away, but she thought of her father again. "Play from your heart," he used to say. She took a deep breath and sat down. The laughter faded slowly as she placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment the hall was quiet. Then she pressed the first note. It was soft, almost uncertain, but it echoed beautifully. She played another, then another, letting the sound guide her. Her hands began to move more smoothly, remembering every late-night hour she had spent practicing alone. The audience still whispered at first, but as the melody began to take shape, the sound changed. The laughter stopped. The notes filled the hall like a story being told without words. Her fear melted away, replaced by something stronger: pride, courage, and freedom. She didn't look at anyone. She just played. She played the song she had written herself, a song that spoke of quiet dreams and small hopes, of pain and persistence, of a girl who refused to give up. The sound was raw, full of emotion. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. As she reached the middle of the song, her fingers began to fly over the keys faster and louder. The piano seemed to come alive under her touch. The music wrapped around the room, and for the first time everyone listened in silence. Some students leaned forward. Others exchanged glances, amazed. The teacher stood near the back of the hall, her eyes glistening with pride. When the final note rang out, it hung in the air for a moment before fading away. There was no sound in the room, not even a whisper. The girl sat there, her heart pounding, unsure if she had done well or made a fool of herself. She looked down at her hands, still trembling. Then slowly the applause began. It started with one clap, then another, and soon the entire hall was filled with the sound of people cheering. The same students who had laughed earlier were now on their feet, clapping and shouting her name. The teacher walked up to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "That was beautiful," she said softly. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes. For the first time she felt seen, not for her worn-out shoes or her quiet nature, but for the music that had always lived inside her. After the event, some of the students who had mocked her came over. They looked awkward, unsure of what to say. One of them finally spoke. "You were amazing," he said. "We didn't know you could play like that." She smiled shyly and nodded, not out of pride, but out of forgiveness. That night, when she got home, she placed her small keyboard on the table and played the same song again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was her voice. She didn't know what would come next, if she would get lessons or if she'd ever play on a big stage again. But she knew one thing for sure: no laughter, no whispers, no judgment could ever take away what she had felt that day. It was the day she learned that courage wasn't about not being scared. It was about doing what you love even when the world laughs at you. And from that day forward, every time she sat at a piano, she remembered that moment, the silence after her music stopped, and the way the same people who laughed were left speechless. After the school event, life started to feel a little different for her. People who once ignored her now smiled when they saw her. Some even waved or asked if she could teach them a few notes. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. The music teacher often invited her to stay after class and use the piano as long as she wanted. It became her favorite part of the day, but even with all the applause and praise, she didn't let it get to her head. When she looked at that piano, she didn't think about showing off or proving anyone wrong anymore. She thought about the feeling of the keys under her fingers, the sound that made her heart race, and how free she felt when she played. That was what mattered to her, the connection between her and the music. At home, things were still simple. The little keyboard sat on a wobbly wooden table in the corner of her small room. Her mother often peeked in when she practiced and smiled quietly. Proud but tired, money was still tight, and her mother worked long hours to keep everything running. Some nights, when the electricity went out, she would light a candle and continue practicing in the dim light, her fingers moving like they knew the way even without seeing the keys. One day, the music teacher called her after class. "You have a gift," the teacher said gently. "Have you ever thought about taking real piano lessons?" She hesitated. "I can't afford that," she said, looking down. The teacher nodded as if she already knew the answer. "There's a small music center downtown. They offer scholarships for talented students. I could help you apply if you'd like." The girl's eyes widened. "Really, you think I could get it?" "I do," the teacher said with a smile. "But you'll have to audition for it." That word, audition, sent chills down her spine. She had never auditioned for anything in her life. Playing in front of her school had been terrifying enough. But now this was something bigger. It meant facing strangers, judges, and real pianists who had years of training. For a moment, she wanted to say no. But deep down, she knew this was a chance she couldn't ignore. That evening, she told her mother about it while they were eating dinner. Her mother's tired face lit up. "You should try," she said softly. "Even if it's scary. You have something special, and the world needs to hear it." She smiled, but fear sat heavy in her chest. That night she barely slept, imagining what it would be like to sit in front of judges. What if she froze? What if they didn't like her music? What if they laughed just like the students once did? The next few weeks were filled with endless practice. Every day after school she stayed in the music room, sometimes until the janitor came to lock up. Her fingers ached, but she didn't stop. She practiced every song she knew and then began creating new melodies, pieces that came from her heart. Her teacher listened sometimes, giving small advice, but mostly letting her play freely. "You don't need to copy anyone," she said once. "Just let your music speak." The day of the audition came faster than she expected. The music center was bigger than anything she had ever seen. There were posters of famous musicians on the walls, and the sound of instruments filled the air. People her age walked around with confidence, holding sheet music and wearing neatly pressed clothes. She felt small in her old shoes and plain sweater, but she reminded herself why she was there, not to look perfect, but to play. When her name was called, she walked into the audition room. 3 judges sat behind a long table. One of them smiled kindly. "What will you be playing today?" She hesitated for a second before replying, "Something I wrote." The judges exchanged surprised looks, but nodded for her to begin. She sat at the piano, her heart thumping so loudly she could hear it. Then she took a deep breath and started playing the song that had come to her one late night when she couldn't sleep. A song about hope, fear, and finding courage when no one believes in you. The notes flowed gently, rising and falling like waves. She forgot about the judges, the room, even her fear. It was just her and the piano again, like it had always been. By the time she finished, the room was quiet. One of the judges leaned forward, smiling softly. "Beautiful," he said. "You played from the heart." When she walked out of the room, she didn't know if she had passed or not, but she felt lighter. She had done it. She had faced her fear and played her truth. A week later, she received a letter in the mail. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a short message. "Congratulations. You have been awarded a scholarship for full piano training." She screamed so loud her mother came running. They both hugged, laughing and crying at the same time. For the first time in a long while, her mother looked hopeful. "You did it," she whispered. "Your father would be so proud." Her lessons began the next month. The music center had grand rooms filled with instruments and teachers who were strict but kind. She was nervous at first. Most of the students there had been playing since they were very young. They could read music easily, talk about composers she had never heard of, and play difficult pieces without breaking a sweat. She struggled to keep up. Sometimes she felt like she didn't belong. One afternoon during a group session, another student laughed when she made a mistake. It reminded her of her old school days, and for a moment the same fear crept back. But this time she didn't run away. She kept her eyes on the keys and finished the song. Her teacher noticed and gave her a small nod of approval. That simple gesture meant everything to her. Little by little she improved. She learned to read sheet music, understand rhythm and technique, and play more complex pieces. But what made her stand out wasn't her technical skill, it was the way she played. Every song she touched carried emotion. Her teachers often said, "You don't just play notes. You make people feel them." Months passed and the music center announced its annual performance night. Each student had to perform in front of families, teachers, and guests. Her teacher asked if she wanted to play one of her own compositions again. She hesitated, remembering how nervous she had been before, but then smiled. "Yes," she said. "I'll play something new." For weeks she worked on her piece. It was inspired by her journey, the laughter, the fear, the courage, and the joy. It started soft, almost hesitant, then grew stronger and brighter. The night of the performance, the hall was filled with people. She could see her mother sitting in the front row, clutching her small bag with pride shining in her eyes. When it was her turn, she stepped onto the stage. Her hands trembled slightly, but she took a deep breath and sat down. As soon as her fingers touched the keys, the world disappeared. The music flowed out of her like a story she had been waiting to tell. Every note felt alive, filled with warmth and emotion. When the last note faded, the room erupted in applause. Her teacher wiped away a tear. Her mother stood up, clapping with all her heart. Even the students who once doubted her looked at her with admiration. She bowed, smiling through her tears. After the performance, a man approached her backstage. He introduced himself as a music producer who attended the event. "Your playing is remarkable," he said. "You remind me of why music matters. It's not about perfection, it's about honesty." He handed her his card. "Keep playing. The world needs more of that." That night, as she walked home with her mother, she felt the cool air on her face and the soft ache in her hands from playing. She looked up at the sky and whispered quietly, "Thank you." She wasn't thanking the audience or the judges. She was thanking the journey, the laughter, the tears, the late nights by candlelight. Every moment had led her here, but somewhere deep inside she knew this was only the beginning. The piano had opened a door for her, a door to a world she was just beginning to explore. She didn't know where it would take her next, but she was ready. As they reached home, her mother turned to her and said, "You see, sometimes people laugh because they don't understand, but when you show them what's inside your heart, they listen." She smiled and nodded. She had learned that lesson well. No matter where she went or how far she climbed, she would never forget where it all started, with a broken keyboard, a little courage, and a dream that refused to fade. Months turned into years, and her life began to change in quiet but powerful ways. The music center became her second home. The sound of the piano keys, the faint smell of polished wood, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, everything there felt like a part of her own heartbeat. She spent hours practicing, sometimes losing track of time until the sky outside turned dark. Her teachers often had to remind her to rest, but she would just smile and say, "Just a few more minutes." Even though she had grown more confident, she never forgot the shy girl who once sat in the back of the classroom, too afraid to touch the piano. That memory stayed with her and reminded her how far she had come. Her music wasn't just about skill anymore, it was about emotion, about telling a story through sound. She played with her heart first and her hands second. At the music center, she had made a few close friends who shared her love for music. They often stayed late after lessons, playing together, laughing and sharing snacks from their lunchboxes. For the first time, she didn't feel out of place. She felt accepted. They respected her not because she was the best, but because she played with honesty. One day, her teacher called her to the office after class. "I have some exciting news," the teacher said. "There's a national competition happening next month. Students from all over the country will be performing. I think you should enter." The words made her freeze. A national competition sounded like something far beyond her reach. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said softly. Her teacher smiled kindly. "You've been ready for a long time. You just need to believe it." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about what her teacher said. Part of her wanted to say no. She was scared of failing, scared of facing an audience bigger than anything she'd ever seen. But another part of her whispered that this was her chance, the same chance her father used to tell her about when she practiced on that broken keyboard. By morning, she had made her decision. She would try. The following weeks were full of long days and late nights. She practiced until her fingers ached and her back hurt. She didn't complain once. She knew that every hour spent was one step closer to something she had dreamed of since she was little. She decided to perform one of her own compositions again, a piece that reflected her journey so far. It was a song about change, about how pain could turn into beauty if you didn't give up. Her teacher helped her polish the performance. Sometimes they stayed so late that the janitor had to switch off the lights to remind them it was time to go. The teacher would smile and say, "Go home, child. Even music needs rest." When the day of the competition arrived, the city's concert hall was buzzing with energy. It was a grand building with shining marble floors and tall glass doors. Inside, the walls echoed with the sound of pianos being tested and musicians warming up. She felt small again, like that nervous girl on her first school stage. But this time, she knew something she hadn't known before. Fear could be turned into strength if you faced it. She sat backstage waiting for her turn. She could hear the other performers. Some played fast and technical pieces that seemed impossible to match. Their fingers danced across the keys like they were born for it. Her heart raced. She looked down at her hands, wondering if her music was good enough. She didn't have years of training like them. All she had was her story. When her name was announced, she took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The bright lights made it hard to see the audience, but she could feel hundreds of eyes watching her. She sat down, closed her eyes for a moment, and remembered her father's voice again. "Play from your heart." The first note was soft, almost like a whisper. Then came another and another until the melody began to bloom. It was slow and emotional, a piece that carried the weight of her past but also the light of her hope. The music rose gently, building emotion with every chord. The hall grew silent. The judges leaned forward, listening closely. She wasn't thinking anymore. She wasn't worrying about mistakes or perfection. She just played. Every part of her soul poured out through her fingertips. The piano became her voice, and for those few minutes she spoke a language only her heart could understand. When the last note faded, she stayed still, breathing heavily. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Then suddenly the audience erupted into applause. The sound washed over her like a wave. She looked up, dazed, and saw people standing. Even one of the judges wiped a tear. She bowed, her hands trembling but her heart full. Backstage, her teacher hugged her tightly. "You did it," she said softly. "No matter what happens next, you've already won." The results were announced later that evening. She didn't expect much. There were so many incredible performers. But when they called her name as one of the top winners, she froze in disbelief. She walked up to the stage, tears in her eyes, and accepted the small golden trophy. It wasn't just an award. It was proof that hard work, belief, and passion could turn laughter into applause. When she returned home that night, her mother was waiting at the door. She didn't even say a word. She just hugged her daughter tightly. It was the kind of hug that said everything: pride, love, relief, and gratitude. In the days that followed, her story spread beyond the music center. A local newspaper wrote an article about her, calling her the girl with the piano heart. People started recognizing her when she walked through the market or on her way to school. Some stopped to congratulate her. Others asked her for advice. She always smiled humbly and said the same thing: just keep believing even when no one else does. Her success opened new doors. She was invited to perform at small concerts, charity events, and even on local television. But even with all the attention, she stayed the same. Simple, quiet, and deeply connected to her roots. She still practiced on her old keyboard at home sometimes, just to remind herself where she started. One afternoon, while walking home from a rehearsal, she passed by her old school. The sight of the building brought back a flood of memories, the laughter, the fear, the first time she sat at that piano. She decided to step inside. The halls looked smaller now, almost like time had shrunk them. When she entered the music room, she saw the same piano standing there, a little dustier but still shining. A few students were inside, chatting and practicing. One of them noticed her and whispered something. Soon they all turned to look at her. She smiled and walked toward the piano. "Do you mind if I play for a minute?" she asked. They nodded, still unsure who she was. She sat down, touched the keys, and began to play the same piece she had played that first day, the one that had turned laughter into silence. The sound filled the room, soft and rich. When she finished, the students stared at her, speechless, just like her classmates had years ago. Then one of them asked shyly, "Are you the girl from the newspaper?" She laughed quietly. "Maybe," she said. "But more importantly, I'm someone who never stopped trying." As she walked out of the school, the teacher who had once given her that first chance came into the hallway. Their eyes met and they both smiled. No words were needed. Life didn't suddenly become easy after that. There were still struggles, still days when she felt tired or uncertain. But she had learned something valuable. Success wasn't about being the best. It was about never giving up on what you love even when others doubt you. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit by the window with her small keyboard and play quietly. The city lights flickered outside and the sound of the keys filled the room. She didn't play for trophies or attention anymore. She played because music had become her way of breathing. Her journey had only just begun, but one thing was clear. She had found her purpose. And no matter where life took her next, the piano would always be her companion, her voice, and her truth. After winning the competition, her life began to move faster than she could have ever imagined. Each day seemed to bring something new, an invitation to perform, an interview, or a message from someone who had seen her play and wanted to tell her how much her music had touched their heart. It all felt strange at first. Just a year ago, she was sitting at a small keyboard in her dimly lit room, dreaming of a chance to play on a real stage. Now people were calling her talented, gifted, and extraordinary, but she didn't see herself that way. She still felt like the same quiet girl who once got laughed at for touching the piano. Even with the recognition, she tried to keep her feet on the ground. Her teacher reminded her often, "Fame is like a wave, it rises and falls. But the ocean beneath it, that's your passion. Never let that fade." Those words stayed with her. She kept practicing every day, learning new pieces, writing her own, and helping other students at the music center whenever she could. She didn't want to be known just for one performance. She wanted to grow, to keep discovering what music could make her feel. One morning, she received a letter from the city's cultural department. They were organizing a charity concert to raise funds for children who couldn't afford instruments or lessons. They wanted her to perform as a guest pianist. The letter said her story had inspired many, and they believed her presence would encourage young dreamers. She read it twice, her hands trembling slightly. A concert that could help other children learn music. It felt like everything had come full circle. She accepted the invitation without hesitation. The following weeks were filled with rehearsals and meetings. The concert was going to be held in the biggest auditorium in the city, a place she had only seen on television. The thought of performing there made her nervous, but this time her fear felt different. It wasn't about being judged. It was about wanting to make a difference. She wanted every note she played to reach the hearts of those listening. The day before the concert, she visited the venue. The hall was enormous, with tall red curtains, golden lights, and hundreds of empty seats stretching out before the stage. She walked up to the grand piano and touched the keys softly. It felt like they were waiting for her. Closing her eyes, she played a few notes, letting the sound echo through the empty hall. It gave her chills. She smiled quietly to herself, thinking how far she had come from that shy little girl afraid to play in front of classmates. The next evening, the concert began. The hall was packed. Families, children, and musicians filled the seats. The air buzzed with excitement. When her name was announced, the audience broke into applause. She walked out, her heart beating fast but steady. The piano sat under a single spotlight, shining like a star waiting to be awakened. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first song was one of her own compositions, inspired by her journey, a melody that started softly, full of hesitation, then grew stronger and brighter, filled with hope. The notes floated through the hall, weaving emotions together like threads of light. People leaned forward, listening intently. Some closed their eyes, others held hands. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. But she didn't stop there. She played another song, one dedicated to the children in the audience, the ones who maybe didn't believe they could ever afford to play music. The tune was simple but full of warmth. It was a song that said, "You can." By the end of her performance, many in the audience were wiping tears from their eyes. As she stood and bowed, she saw something that made her chest tighten with emotion. Children clapping wildly, smiling as if they had just seen their own dreams take shape. It was in that moment she realized something important. Success wasn't just about winning competitions or playing on big stages. It was about touching lives, about giving others the courage to dream. After the concert, she stayed to talk with the children. Some were shy, others curious. One small boy asked, "Did people ever laugh at you too?" She smiled and said softly, "Yes, they did." And then she began to play. The hall fell silent. The melody she played was tender, filled with emotion. It spoke of pain, courage, growth, and forgiveness. Every note seemed to carry a story, the story of a girl who refused to stop believing in her dream. When she finished, there was no sound for a few seconds, just the echo of her last note fading into the stillness. Then applause erupted, long, loud, and heartfelt. Some of the teachers had tears in their eyes. Even a few of the students who had laughed at her years ago came up to her afterward and said, "We were wrong. You were special even then." She smiled and said, "You don't need to apologize. Your laughter helped me find my strength." That night when she went home, she sat by her piano and thought about how life had changed. She wasn't the same person anymore, but she was grateful for everything that had happened, the good and the bad. Each moment had shaped her into who she was. A few months later, her story was featured in a local newspaper. They wrote about her journey from being mocked to becoming a musician who inspired hundreds of children. The article ended with a quote from her. "If someone laughs at your dream, don't be angry. Just keep going. One day they'll listen." That quote spread quickly. People shared it online and messages began pouring in from around the world. Some were from children who had been discouraged, others from adults who had given up on their dreams. Her story reminded them that it was never too late to try again. One morning, while reading through the letters she had received, she found one that stood out. It was from a man who said he used to be one of the students who laughed at her during that first piano moment. He wrote, "I still remember that day. I didn't understand what music meant back then. Now I teach my daughter to never laugh at anyone's dream. I want to thank you for teaching me that lesson." She folded the letter slowly, her eyes glistening. It felt like a chapter of her life had finally closed with peace. In the years that followed, her music center expanded into more cities. She trained other teachers, built partnerships, and kept the heart of her mission alive, to give every child a chance to feel the power of music. She never sought fame, though it came naturally. What mattered most to her was seeing another child sit at a piano for the first time, their fingers trembling, their eyes shining with hope. On quiet evenings, when she was alone, she often played that same song she had performed at her old school, the one that told her life story. The notes felt timeless now, as if they belonged not just to her, but to everyone who had ever been laughed at and kept going anyway. And sometimes, when her students asked her how she managed to stay strong after all that happened, she would smile and say, "When they laughed, I cried for a moment, but then I listened to the sound of my heart, and it was louder than their laughter." Her story became a reminder to many that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the moments of weakness that others don't see. And in every note she played, you could still feel the heartbeat of that little girl who once dared to touch the piano and changed her world forever.